Welcome. I am Baron Guillermo de Cervantes of the Kingdom of Trimaris, and this is Trimaris Talks. It's an exciting night. We're going to be discussing the principles of the art of war, and for me, more fascinating is how we would apply it to the SCA. And so to do this, we have Duke Gunnar and Duke Kurn and Jarl Ari to help us in this discussion. They've all been active at war at Pennsic and at Gulf War and several other wars. They've been generals and commanders, and they've actually applied these principles. And so it's a unique opportunity for us to hear from their experience. So, Duke Gunnar, can you tell us a little bit about your history in the SCA?
So I heard about the SCA in college and was intrigued. Um, but I was ROTC had a scholarship between school and my ROTC activities and having a part-time job on top of all that. I didn't have time to get involved. Um, I met a group. Well, I got up to Fort Carson, Colorado, as my first duty station. And there was a picture in the newspaper of a fighter practice. And my wife at the time said, "Isn't this that group that you were interested in?" And had a phone number. So I contacted them, started to get involved. I got my first set of armor put together. Well, I got a set of armor put together, was going to practice. And then my first wife basically said it was either her or the SCA.
Hmm.
So I got rid of everything but my helmet. I wanted to keep the helmet. And I didn't do anything with the in the SCA, but the people I had met, I was in a D&D game with. And so after my first wife left, I was at the D&D game, and they were all talking about getting. It was in 1989. They were talking about going to the Australia War, and I said, "Hey, I'm not dissing your hobby. It's cool, but I'm dead broke. I just went through a divorce. There's no way I could afford to do any of this. So if we could just play the game and go, that would be great." And they said, "Wait, hold on. You would do it if you had armor and you could go." I said, "Yeah, but I got rid of everything but my helmet. I'm broke. I can't do it." Guy left the game, went out, came back, handed me a coat of plates.
Hmm.
Said, this doesn't quite fit me, but it'll fit you here." Another guy from the game got up, went out to his car, came back with leg armor. He said, "I've been meaning to make new leg armor. As long as I have this, I'm not going to make new leg armor. So here, you have this, and I'll go make new stuff." Everybody in the gaming group did. By the time it was done, I had a full set of armor, minus the helmet, which I already had, right? So I had a full set of armor. I had a shield and two swords.
Hmm.
And then they said, "Okay."
Now, what's your excuse?
They said, "Now here's the deal." And I'm like, "Oh, now there's the catch," right? They said, the deal is, one, you need to go ride with us to the Australia War. So they were going, they provided the transportation. The other thing was, when you come up with your own stuff, because you'll want to put your own armor together, when you get your own armor done, give this to somebody else.
Hmm. This is the way.
And I went to really my first real event was the Australia War in February of 1990. And I was absolutely blown away by just seeing what happened.
Hmm.
And I didn't think it would hit me like it did. What really got me is after the two lines had met in the first field battle, the guy to my right, my sword side, got pushed back a little bit. He was a smaller guy. And so I swung I swung my sword. There was now an enemy soldier behind me. I swung my sword. I hit him right in the ribs and he went down. And I was like,
Pretty cool.
And then I was addicted from that point.
Oh. So, a quick question. How many years in?
Well, so if we start it at when my active point, so in 90, right, was when I played around a little bit before, right? But starting it from 90, that would be what, 35 years?
Okay. And you're a Duke, so how many times have you been crowned?
Four.
Okay. So I think that qualifies as an Uber Duke.
I, you know that it uh, Duke works just fine for me. But
So now the question of the day is, what was your initial reaction to the art of war?
my initial reaction to the Art of War was when I first read it was I don't see how this applies.
Hmm.
I had to read it, and we talked about this before. I had to read it a number of times. I think I read it like 6 times before I finally like, oh, the light went on. This is how this can apply to the SCA. But at first blush, a lot of it looks like it
Hmm.
doesn't apply, but it does.
Hmm. If you loosen your view and your perspective, you can find it, right?
Well, there's a difference.
Not to be so strict to the
There's
word.
a difference in martial arts, right? You could probably apply it to anything, but we'll say martial arts between principles and techniques. Techniques are situation dependent. Principles are all encompassing. They are not situated. They are truths regardless of the situation. And the art of war has a lot of principles. You just have to learn how to apply them.
Awesome. Awesome. Dude, Kern, can you tell us a little about where you come from? How did you come
So
to the SCA?
hello everybody. I started in the SCA in 1991 in Gainesville, and I was coaching high school baseball. And after it was in the park, it was the game that we played because kids were only allowed to have so many practices, and so we had voluntary practice in the public park, which they all came to, of course. And I saw these guys smashing and bashing each other, and my history is I've always loved swords. John Carter was my first hero, when it came to swords. He's the best swordsman that's ever lived in any fantasy, even better than Benedict of Amber, according to Tarek will argue, but my buddy. Um, but I spoke to after all the kids were gone. I started talking to the man who would become my knight, Duke Llewellyn, and that was it. That was 34 years ago. Got knighted in 1998 um, uh, by Jarl Bokomaton, who actually gave me a copy of The Art of War
Hmm.
as a knighting present. And I read it. It was a long time ago. I got knighted in 98. And I gave it to somebody else. And I'll be honest, I don't recall who. And like His Grace Gunnar just said, I still struggle with the application. I think that uh, strategy versus tactics, maybe principle versus what Gunnar was saying. Maybe there's a similarity there. Only in the most vague sense do I find it to apply. Know your enemy. Come on. Those guys are going to do a right flank, right? That works, right? But I remember reading it. I don't remember all the quotes. There were some that stood out to me, and my command background. I my background of command came from watching my knight and Earl Shosai as well during Scots Welsh War, and then eventually I became captain of Cerberus, a conglomerate of fighting households. And I remember the first time I was the captain, watching losing several times to our enemies and or our friendly opponents, and trying to get better at it. And I've been commander at Gulf Wars, been given some opportunities and in general at Gulf Wars, and this past year. And command is a double-edged sword. It's fun because you sometimes get to do the strategy you want to do, but it's nerve-wracking because all the weight feels like it's on you, because you have your king's confidence, and there's you listen. If winning is just for fun, let this guy win right here, right? So I, but I think that within the SCA, it sounds cliche, but making sure everybody has fun is a win. And but like Gunnar said, I struggle with the application at times, more than at times a lot. Anyway, that's what I come up with.
Very cool. And how many times have you been crowned?
Same as Gunnar. So
Great. All righty. Jarl Ari, how did you come to the SCA?
Well, initially, about 2001, my wife had been in about 13 years prior to me, and uh, she basically convinced me to go camping because I was an Eagle Scout, and she's like, "Oh, you like going outdoors?" And took me to my first event, put me in some funny clothes, and then I got to watch this little guy in a tournament just climb this tower of a man that I hadn't even heard of combat in the SCA until that moment. Thus inspired, found my local practice, and my wife and I started fighting armored. Um, Took me to about my first command position was as Primus of the Varangian in about 2004. Did that for a couple of years. Um, and then afterwards entered the Tremarian command staff for quite a many year. Spent about 4 years as our warlord, one of which I was the crown during, but I enjoy the command position, so I maintained it during my reign. I guess uh, I started studying the art of war when I was about 17. Was the first time I read it. I was a Civil War reenactor, and we studied Napoleonic tactics, and a lot of those also apply to how we function tactically in the SCA. Um, so that's a bit of my history there. Um, I'm definitely one of the guys. Fezzik's one of my favorite characters because I like to repeat his quotas. I, fighting one man, I'm not used to that. My brain doesn't work as well when I'm fighting one person. Give me a bunch of people to fight, and that's where Ari's brain does the best work, in my opinion. But and
pretty good
to cap off the
one-on-one as well. Just
what's
saying.
that?
I said you're pretty good one-on-one as well.
Yeah, but I'm the
Okay.
slacker here. I'm only the just a Duke. I've only won crown twice in this crowd, so
Okay. We're all
Um,
just knights.
So the as you crack open the book of the Art of War, one of the first principles, and it's probably some of the most quoted and most popular principle, is to assess the five measures in a battle, to assess weather, terrain, leadership, discipline, and something they called the way he called the Sun Tzu called the way. Um, so applying that to the SCA, I got to call out Duke Kurn because this year at Gulf War, when we did the field battle, that's the first thing I saw him do is he assessed the field of the field battle, and he called out there was a section that had some weird wire on the field, and
Oh yeah.
we had to be aware of the situation. The Gulf War field battle has a slant to it, so it's one side has a rise. So uh, how do you think that? How else would you apply this print these five measures when it comes to the SCA?
Well, that's a big question. There's a lot going on there. Um, I mean, it's with respect to this past war, when you said, hey, applying terrain, I wanted the high ground. I mean, Anakin knows better, right? But he didn't. And Obi-Wan, was wise. So take the high ground. And you also have to assess your troops and know thyself. You have to know what your and that will probably be the common thread that we all say. And I don't mind if we continue to use it because it's such a that that part I do identify with in the book. Knowing what you're capable, and that applies down to the grand scale of a fighting army, to tactics, and to individuals. So um,
That calls out
knowing
leadership and that calls out discipline for sure.
right. So in regards to those terrain and knowing what you're capable of, I think that's super important. Uh, I'll be honest, like I said, I haven't read it in years, so I don't remember what the other principles were, but weather, if it's raining, don't fight if it's lightning. I mean, if it's raining, it doesn't really affect us that much as long as there's not that much lightning. We're still going to fight. Some people will walk away and say, "Hey, I don't want to slip and fall. We're not spring chickens." Then you have to pay attention to that throughout the war if you're talking about a week-long war. But I'll leave it there for those two and let my friends comment on it if they have any.
Gunnar, look,
So I like taking one at a time. So I'm going to start with, since we were just talking about it, start with weather. All right. So knowing what the weather is going to be, right? I mean, you go, let's say you go to Gulf Wars. If it's raining or if it's a heat wave comes in, it's really hot, either one of those, both sides are not going to be as mobile. So when you're planning out what you're going to do for the battle, your command meeting the day before, be aware of, is it going to be comfortable? If it is, you might have a plan that requires units moving and being very mobile. If it's going to be dying hot, you don't want to do that. If it's going to be raining, assuming that maybe the field's wet. I mean, if it's pouring, they're going to put a hold on the battle, right? But I mean, if the battlefield is just wet, again, you may not want to have a very mobile plan. You may want to fight a more static technique. So that certainly applies. I definitely agree with my brother Kurn on if you have the option of taking high ground, take the high ground. It is more difficult for somebody to fight going up. That's why taking the high ground has been a principle for as long as people have been fighting.
and then wait for them to come to you, right?
Right. So, but again, so people would look at that and they would think, well, how does that apply on the field battle at Gulf Wars, right? They pick the battlefield. I don't have any say. How can I use the terrain? Well, one of the things, it's got thick woods on one side, and a barrier on the other. So you're not going to, where the other side's going to stop, right? So you can bear that in mind when you come up with your plan. They're not going to come around and flank through the woods there. They just don't do it, right? In fact, we've had plans before holding the top of the field in a giant cup. I'm a big fan of the cup where you get them to come into the middle and then you can outnumber them in the middle. But the anchors of that cup are the static sides of that field battle. That's your terrain. So that applies leadership, that applies knowing the terrain. So these the principles do apply. What's another principle out of that 12?
Leadership.
Well, leadership is key. And as my brother Kurn had said, you have to know yourself, what you're capable of. Knowing what the different units are capable of. So as an example, Moose Lodge doesn't tend to be a very mobile unit, but it's a great rock to put in front of somebody and make them go around. They will hold the position. They're very good at that. So that, right? You want to do say hammer and anvil, right? They can make a great anvil. They're going to stop the enemy from coming through.
What is a hammer and anvil?
So the hammer and anvil is where generally you pick a side. It can be done a few different ways, but let's say you decide you're going to hold the left side of the line. You're going to keep them from advancing. So that's the anvil, right? So if I'm hammering a horseshoe, right? I got an anvil, I got a hammer. You swing the hammer around and you pound the horseshoe, right? The anvil is what holds it in place. Now, remember we talked about having more mobile units, right? You may want to have that led with maybe an elite unit of some knights to be the hammer and swing around. You're going to hit a flank and swing them around, but that anvil will hold them in place, and you crush the enemy between those two units.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that answered your question.
So the anvil, the hammer is the strike force.
It's the mobile side of the force. You have one part of your force that's going to fix the enemy in place and not let them get away, and you have another mobile force that's going to swing around, flank them, and crush them between that hammer and the anvil.
Very cool. Ari, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Practical.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Ari, go ahead.
No, you can finish your statement.
Oh, I was just going to ask if there were any other principles you wanted to bring up, but it sounded like you had something. So go ahead.
No, I agree with you both. More practical applications. I'm going to use Gulf Wars as an example. Knowing what battle you're going into is going to change with the weather. Say the ravine battle. Trimarians traditionally hold out better in hotter, more humid environments. So that may be your implementation of weather, knowing the night before is like, well, if it's going to be a muggy day, we can push them early in the battle and get them to burn themselves out, knowing we've got a little bit more stamina in our tanks just because of geographic conditioning. Uh, and vice versa. If the weather's bad and it's raining, then we're probably going to move a little bit slower, and yeah, we're going to probably stick to the uphill side, and hopefully if we slip going downhill. So the practical application of the weather and terrain can definitely play a factor, but knowing that ahead of time so that you can adjust your plan accordingly in those command meetings beforehand, so not just you have a plan but everyone gets that same plan based on it.
So the first chapter is strategic assessment. And so we've assessed weather, terrain, leadership, and the discipline of your force. The the fifth measurement is interesting, and it's called the way. And that's really about uh, having the people, your force, to have the same aim as a leader. So that everybody, as Ari just mentioned, make sure the army is aware of the plan. But it's more than that. It's also about how the crown and the generals relate to the people. How do they treat the people? Do they have a good relationship with the soldiers? Does a king have a good relationship with the gentles of a kingdom? Is there justice and faith in the community? The humaneness of and the relationship is the ideal of the way, and it's a fascinating that it's given equal representation amongst the other four measures. Um,
So, an application of that last one, a little bit, I would say, is, how the king is perceived, the crown, because it's not just the king, it's the king and the queen. But how they are perceived is, uh, it's the if if the king does not have a relationship with the army, it's the general's fault, in my opinion. And I think the general's job is to make sure that the king's vision manifests on the battlefield. And it's important for that general to communicate and with the crown, but it's I think the general does a lot in that regard, especially within our game of the SCA. When I was not in the military, and you know follow suit, follow the orders. That's the real military. But in our game, it's different. You got to make everybody happy. So But I think the generals, the way is to make sure that the army is inspired by their king and make sure the king is seen that way.
Duchess Sibylla added, the army needs to have buy-in.
Well,
Uh,
there you go.
they fight harder for someone that they want to follow.
Agreed.
So one of the things that I think both Kern and Ari have done a great job of is getting the Army fired up. I very much agree with Kern on if winning's not important, let me win. Right. So there are some times that crowns show up and their focus is everybody having a good time, which is wonderful, but they're not as focused on winning. Both all three of us here, but I've certainly seen it in Art are very competitive. They want to win. They want to have everybody to have a good time, but winning is more fun than losing. So they tend to be motivating the army to go out and fight hard and focus on winning. And if you do that, you'll have a good time doing it. There have been crowns that, yeah, whatever, just go have a good time. And that's great. People can go out and whatever and have a good time out on the field, but that doesn't always lead to success as far if you're measuring success by victory on the field.
So in assessing leadership, it seems to me we've talked a little bit about self-awareness, but assessing the leadership of your opponent is heavily mentioned in the art of war, and assessing trustworthiness, intelligence, humaneness, courage, and sternness as ways of assessing perhaps not just yourself, but your sergeants and the leaders in your command, but also in your enemy. You guys have a unique perspective because you've been at this for over 30 years. And so you know who's on the other side of that field. They may be your friends from other kingdoms. And so if you find out who the general is, I imagine that would affect your strategy in the battle and your tactics in the battle.
Oh, absolutely. It has been one of the heavier factors during my time as a warlord that I used when developing the plans. Um, Knowing which commanders are in charge of which units, knowing their heraldry so they can be pointed out on the battlefield, communicating that through our allies and within our kingdom, knowing if they prefer left side of the field, right side of the field. Um, More importantly, if how they react to spears. Um, Depends on the scenario, obviously, but there are some kingdoms that just don't fight enough spear to be competent at defending themselves against it. So going into the battle, having an overall game plan uh, and matching up kingdoms and different units to who they best would fight against, and by best I mean the way I would phrase it is, who are you going to go out there and roll up? I wasn't looking for, yeah, it's going to be a good fun fight between, Meridies and Glenaban. No, I want to know who you're going to roll up. Like, which kingdom are you going to destroy? And then I can put you to task to something else. So those factors definitely need to be played in and experience on the commander's part. Um, if you're a young, squire looking to get into the command socket, do it while you're a squire. Don't wait. Get out there, get to those command meetings because that's where you're going to meet the heads of all those different kingdoms' armies and start to learn how they command and what kind of troops they bring to the field traditionally.
You guys want to add anything?
I think we covered that point, unless anybody has a question. What's your next point?
All right. Under discipline, discipline means organization, command, and logistics. And organization, I imagine, would be how well trained is your force. Command may vary from household to household. logistics is pre-planning. Are bearers in place? Are you using things like stopwatches for timed battles? So what are your thoughts about preparing and disciplining the force, the army?
Well, we've had different one of the things that's helped us is we've had different things. Crowns have taxed uh, different units to bring crossbow bolts. Um, that has been a big benefit in a number of Gulf Wars because we've done a great job of shooting the enemy, and you don't want to discount that. So having something to motivate various groups and units to make a bunch of bolts and give them to the army. Right? That would be something as far as logistics.
Making sure siege weapons are well prepared in working order, making sure pavisas are available for those archers.
Sure.
So I'll be honest, it's really hard within our SCA to plan for those types of things. The best thing we can do is before a war, we call somebody and say, "Hey, are you going? Are you bringing that thing you always bring? The trebuchet, the onager, the battling ram, and even when you get a commitment, something's going to happen, and it's not going to all be there. So you gotta be able to be flexible and have basic plans, and you gotta have some backup plans, and I think that's really important. And you know I cannot say enough, when you have the option to have a reserve unit, always have one. If you don't have the ability to have a reserve unit, you can't. I mean, it's just really hard. I almost sometimes say it to the detriment of one of your units. Uh, it's better to have a reserve unit. It's a tough one, but if all things are being equal, that reserve unit is going to follow what you want when it comes to logistics of planning ahead of time. And uh, you know, these armies are conglomerations of groups that, I'm speaking of Gulf Wars and probably Penzik. I've never been a commander at Penzik. A little bit, maybe I had a Palantir, their crown, when I was crowned at Penzik, said, "We're going to fight with you." And, but we don't fight together. It was really just the mob. And, but it's knowing when you have those allies show up, you want the buy-in thing that Sevilla said, "Hey, Your Majesty," or "Hey, General," having a plan ahead of time to make sure you ask this of your army with flexibility. Who do you want to punch in the mouth? What army over there? Kind of going back to Gunnar. Who do you want to hit? Right? Give them that buy-in. Feel like they have some ownership on it. And I'll, you try to fulfill that role, but they have to understand that if things change, then we will, modify the plan. But talking with your allies beforehand is a little bit of logistics, in my opinion. And knowing, having some plans and having those commander meetings, you know, designated before you go to war, where the major players can show up and talk about, and that to me is all part of logistics, planning.
So I just want to touch on something that Kern said, the importance of having a reserve unit. One of the things I've certainly seen in the SCA and when I was an officer in the Army that was said a lot is the first casualty of contact with the enemy is the plan.
Yeah.
So things are going to change, and having that reserve unit. I'm a football coach, so I'll use the football analogy. Your reserve unit's at linebacker, right? You've got the front units that are going to hit, and something is going to either an opportunity is going to present itself, or somebody's going to break through. Some of the enemy, something's going to happen, and that reserve unit is what you send to either plug a hole or to take advantage of an
And I'm
opportunity.
happy you didn't say safety. Because if your reserve unit is a safety, they've lost. It's a linebacker. Good analogy. Not the safety. Safety
Yes.
means you're screwed. It's the last line of defense. I like that analogy. It is a linebacker. Yeah.
Well, that kind of leads to the next principle. Assess advantages in taking advice, and being able to assess an advantage. Ari talked a little bit earlier about situational awareness on the battlefield, but I think it starts well before war because I've learned that the war actually begins when you're gathering your allies and you're traveling. The crown travels to other kingdoms, and you secure relationships with allies or even mercenaries.
Yeah, I found that generally the plannings for Gulf Wars for us specifically are as soon as someone wins Crown List and they're going to be the crown at war. As soon as they figure out who their warlord's going to be, that's when every single bit of that begins.
Mhm.
Both my reigns were Gulf Wars reigns, and literally the week of winning Crown List before I'd even ascended the throne, I got with my warlord. I started, paying attention to crown lists across the known world, seeing who my contacts were going to be, and planning a travel itinerary so I could go meet those kingdoms that I would hopefully recruit. Uh, so yeah, it starts about 8 months before war.
Yeah.
So, question we have, are there ever any battlefield musicians at war, like drummers?
Yeah, not necessarily on the battlefield. Both Gulf Wars and Pennsic, and I've been out the Great West. We've had some good drum corps at all of those battles. Occasionally, you'll catch someone with the pipes at Pennsic, but not on the battlefield, but on the side of the battlefield, given that ambiance, which is always phenomenal. There's nothing like a good drum beat to roll into battle to, for sure.
Truth.
I just wanted to touch on something that Ari had said as far as when things plant. So unlike Ari, my reigns have been Penzic reigns, but the Trimarian calendar revolves around Gulf Wars. So preparation for Gulf Wars starts before the Gulf Wars reign. As the Penzic reign, I would be visiting other kingdoms. When I decided who I was going to fight for at Penzic, it was based on what were they going to give us for Gulf Wars. So even when it's not your war, here at Trimaris, you are planning and making alliances and visiting people, getting folks to come and fight with you at Gulf Wars. So it starts way early.
So that's building your advantages based on who's going to show up to fight with you.
Sure, and you can get people to feel obligated, right? I would traveled out to Callantir events. Went to Callantir events. I was one of the first crown to go actually visit Callantir. And they're like, great, well, Trimarian, Anstiora gets them all the time, but we actually had Callantir one year because I went out there. I went to their coronation. I went to War of the Lilies out there with them, which were all during a what we would call a Penzic reign, but that was all to get Callantir to show up and fight for us one year at Gulf Wars. So
So another way of assessing advantages and taking advice, I would assume that would also be the War Council in preparation and hearing the advice of the other generals that show up to that War Council as you're planning.
well, it's key to realize that nobody knows everything, and everybody can be wrong at some time. So you have to have that virtue of humility, right? To realize you may have a great idea, but you want to listen to what your advisors say. They may or may not change your mind, but be open to it. Right? Have the humility to realize that somebody may see something that you didn't.
Mhm.
Yeah, my practicing philosophy for command meetings was generally know this scenario, know the rules of the scenario, what's allowed in this scenario. Get your commanders together and let them put their units in the best places for those scenarios. Um, Not so much calling the shots for every battle necessarily. Very often, just knowing the units ahead of time, you know where everybody is going to fall in relatively well. Uh, North Shield likes to take the high side of the hill in the ravine battle. Manstera likes to, walk up the forest side of the hill and turn left. Things like this are fairly standard. So you can have a general idea of how things are going to go beforehand with the battles, but yet you can also have the commanders give their input, um, and things are probably going to work out the same way either way.
And I would add to what Ari just said. You know, as general, I asked my crown, can we say thank you to our allies by granting them, a command of one of the battles. And listen, if I was ever a visiting ally and they said you can have this battle, I'd be like, heck yeah. Come on, every guy wants to run their play, right? So, and you just have to roll with it, whether their plans are just as good as ours, and they're appointing someone as a general, and they have trust in that person, and you just have to, I remember one year, oh my gosh, he's your really good friend with the Polish Hussar. Oh my God,
Oh,
Vlad, right?
Vlad from North Shield,
Vlad.
yeah.
He came down with the tank, the Da Vinci tank,
Yeah, one of
and
his baronies built him a Da Vinci tank on wheels
right.
for the
And
battlefield.
so, and I was king at that Gulf Wars, and listen, it was cool as AF, right? But it wasn't super mobile. So going to
Hey, I
battle,
was the
listen,
propulsion on that thing. It was
okay, I'm
really
just saying.
mobile.
And listen, we lost a battle because I said no one is going to advance past the tank because I wanted those guys that made that tank to want, I wanted them to be able to play. And I'll be honest, one of the things that growing up underneath my knight and Shosai, one of the things that I learned about battle is, and actually Sun Tzu says this all the time. If you don't go first, you're delaying it. You can. I think it says something about going first can be folly, but it's better than to delay, right? Or something like that. And I learned go first, and I take the hit for that loss. But you know what? It was amazing to watch that thing and everybody fight around it, and it made everyone's day. Not just on our side, but on their side. And it was
It was
amazing.
it was
So
definitely spectacular because even
yeah,
as we progressed down the field with the tank proceeding out front,
yeah,
we
yep,
didn't tell the enemy our plan. But when
no,
we got within a few spears length on the opposite side of the field, and they saw us stop when we normally wouldn't,
and the
both ends
tank,
of the line stopped and watched the
yep,
other end of the battlefield progress just to watch the tank get its business on.
yeah.
And then once it went down, everybody went back to beating each other.
And
But
and sometimes, within the SCA, listen, we're super ultra competitive. We want to win. I said if it's just for fun, but that's a win. And I remember as earlier at Gulf Wars, there was this uh Cerberus did the hoplite pike unit, and we had spears and shields. And when we were the center of the Trimaran army, and we went in and we beat them two in a row. And then watching Onstiora adapt, and basically I thought we were going to roll them. I'm like, this is working great. And then they adapted. They basically they put their, whenever you set up a fighting unit, if you have, there are different levels of experience. You put your shield wall. They're usually greener, better, good word to use. And you put your studs on the flanks because that's what's going to prevent you from being rolled. And that's what Osteora did to the phalanx. They didn't fight it. They totally, and it was to see that happen and that evolve in the fight was, even though it was against us, I thought it was beautiful. and it's a learning process. Osceola has made us a better fighting kingdom, so we've all had the 100 Years' War, get
So we're
better
ta
or die.
we're
So
talking about the Da Vinci tank. Ari, you had a story about how you used your longship in battle.
Yeah, my second
yeah.
reign, I took a boat trailer and built a longboat out of it on wheels. For SCA combat, it was classified as an archer pavilion, which meant, two simple strikes with a weapon could kill it. The first time we took it out into the field battle, we loaded it up full of archers, and unfortunately, that put them high and undefended, so they got picked off pretty quickly. Um, the second round, there were no archery or uh, projectile siege equipment in that battle, but the boat was still allowed in because it was basically a mobile pavise. Um, so me and a couple of my squires ran it up the hill as fast as we could with me driving, parked it right in front of one of their heaviest shield wall units, right next to the clump of bushes, and parked it, killed it, and took off. Basically making that unit break up into three separate bodies, and then placing our army just where they had to address us as three split units to our one mass. Um, it was particularly fun that night when their commander came to me and shared a beer with me and cussed me for doing it because he
Mm,
enjoyed how much it wrecked his game plan just by having this extra obstacle that he couldn't plan around.
yeah.
So I'm struggling with one part of Sun Tzu's writing, and
Oh yeah,
I need,
this
I need,
subject.
I need you to help me with this. There's a lot of talk about the use of deception. And he says, use deception, appear less than, control your opponent through deception, appear what you are not, mask your advantages from your enemy. But in the SCA, especially in war and battle, we hold to the principles and virtues of chivalry. And chivalry is about doing right and being righteous and being honest and humble and all these wonderful virtues that we use to fight the seven deadly sins. And yet Sun Tzu's talking about how to use deception in war. And it seems like it would contradict what the principles that we hold to in the SCA.
So I don't think it necessarily conflicts at all, because you can have somebody your enemy make assumptions, and if they make bad assumptions, that's on them. So, as an example, for many years, Gold Star would show up, and Gold Star is a larger household with many households underneath it. Well, so I'll use Cerebus as an example. They were great. They would show up in uniform. They would all be dressed alike. They looked great. We would all, as we didn't have a Gold Star uniform. Everybody from their own household, whatever, would show up. We looked like a ragtag group of misfits, but we probably were as knight heavy and royal peer heavy as any other unit. And so there were a number of times at Gulf Wars that Onstiora would make a push against Gold Star because they wanted to push the weak point, and we just looked like we were a ragtag group of folks. We didn't look like we were a hard, well-trained unit, which we were. So that was deception. Nothing unchivalrous about it. They made the assumption that we were just all thrown together and weren't used to fighting as a unit. That was on them.
In the I did a class on deception when it comes to fighting one on one. And I don't think there's any difference I think it's a very easy transition. Um, you're expected to move your troops the way you want to move them. Granted, there's only so much room on the battlefields that we use, And we're fearless because we're not really dying, right? But there's different things we can do. And if you think of one of the things I remember speaking about was, and you guys were in the military, I'm not, but I looked this up and you can tell me if I'm wrong. There's a, the word feint in modern military it's a deception without contact, while a demonstration is a deception with contact. And, I think of that last one as, equating or going back to football is the pulling guard, right? The pulling guard, they end up sneaking through somehow and they make contact, and usually it's a speed bump, right? It's to slow some group down so the rest of the army can get the advantage by having the numbers over here. And I'm totally fine with it. There to me, I don't think there's any difference between me pump faking and throwing a shot and me throwing these guys over here because they weren't facing them and having them hit those guys over there, and the rest of the army sweeps, does a right sweeping flank. I have no problems with it at all. It's chess, and I can hide my knight with my bishop and my rook, and I can. I didn't tell you what I was going to do. Pretty sneaky, wasn't it? Right? I have no problem with that. We're all playing with what we bring, right? Chess is the ultimate game of the mind. I know what pieces you have. You know what pieces I have. I'm showing you what I'm doing, and I'm still going to beat you. That's the way I look at it.
Ari?
So, Xenophon in the chat brings up a great example of one of the two sides of that, in my opinion. There's the battlefield side, and there's the off battlefield. On the battlefield, one of my favorite things to do is lowering my spears so that the enemy can't count spears, because I guarantee you a good commander is counting spears. Or counting archers, they're counting siege equipment. So disguising your unit by putting
Okay.
your spears low, or making a second and third rank unit hiding behind a high shield wall unit to disguise their position, or having a unit inside the fort show a big presentation at one breach, and then as soon as contact is made, have that unit break off and go to a different breach and sally out from there. Those are on battlefield examples of how to be deceptive, and I'm down for every single one of them, because that is command and control, and any unit that can execute that kind of command level on the battlefield is definitely going to be worth its weight off the battlefield. And this is why I got excited, because uh, years past, now mind you, I haven't seen any of these in a hot second, but examples of deception related to off the field. I have seen opposing dukes pretending to be drunk, skirting the edges of command meetings, trying to glean a little bit of information. That used to be fairly regular about a decade, 15 years ago, to the extent that even during one of my command meetings, I had been using a dry erase board, and I took the sketch that we had there and rearranged it with bad information and left it sitting there. You know, um,
That's
uh,
fun.
yeah, one of the tactics, mind you, I didn't ever get confirmation that this happened, but the rumor mill was suggesting that there was a fort battle where um, the defenders had 5 lives and the attackers had unlimited resurrection. They were just timed release. And the objective of the scenario was who could take the fort the fastest. The rumor had it that our enemies' chivalry were having their newer fighters in reserve. And once that member of the chivalry had exhausted their 5 lives, they would take lives from the newer members that weren't engaged in combat so they could have their chivalry out there more often. Again, that was rumor mill. I never got confirmation on that one. But these are typically some examples of off the battlefield deception that I do not personally think is condoned in our chivalric and the spirit of our battle and the spirit of our rules. Mind you, it has definitely happened in some occasions. So it is
So,
something to look for as a commander.
so there's an entire chapter in The Art of War about spies. And I didn't think that we would, because we're frenemies, when we go to Gulf War, I didn't think we would use spies because it would just be dirty,
So
underhanded. But if you're telling me that they would send a Duke acting like he's a drunk, that's a spy.
yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean,
Yeah.
and other things that I find just completely abhorring is that there were years that and we got confirmation that our enemy advanced Eora, during their courts would, shout death to Trimaris. And that goes back to that whole morale that we mentioned in the beginning, a crown getting their people behind their cause, which was just to go and fight us. But again, a tactic, a strategy used by people in the past.
So
So,
actually,
hey,
that
hey,
last part, death to Trimaris, I I recall that I can't remember who was king. But that was, one of the things that they used to inspire their troops. And actually, I have no problem with it.
Oh no,
It's within the game, and it's fun. And I remember, oh gosh, oh man, he passed away. He was a knight of Osceola, and Midian was king, and I was commanding, and I was retaining for him after the battle. And their general had made this beautiful shield, period shield. It was a later period with that little, snowplow crease in it, and it had all the Latin words, "Death of Trimaris." And after the war, they, the Austrian general came to me and said, "Hey, I would like to um, burn this shield with you." And I was like, man, this shield is the most period shield I have ever seen, right? And he goes, thank you. I said, maybe you just repaint it, right? And he goes, well, but I have to ask my crown. And my crown was like, no, burn it. But you know what? He was totally okay with it. And that memory I will never forget. It's like the scene of Kingdom of Heaven when he asks, what does Jerusalem mean anyway? And he goes, nothing, everything, right? We have a little bit of that, but it's I think it's theatric. I think my friends across the field are honorable fighters, and if they're doing something, I don't really hold it against them. And if we catch them, so much fun. It creates a whole story, right? Like he's talking about. So
Gunnar, you had something?
so one of the things as far as spying and being completely honorable and friendly with it is when we have people go to other kingdoms events. I mean, it's amazing. I did it. I've done it as prince. I've done it as crown. Uh, Gone to another kingdom's event where they had folks that were going to be fighting against us in Gulf Wars, and I was able to uh, watch the units, and there would be people that brag about what they were capable of doing. They were giving me all sorts of information. I was there above board as prince or as king of Trimaris. They knew who I was,
mhm.
so that's not sneaking around. But I got information on different units, that they were bragging about and proud to give to me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the as we talked about, the principles apply, and there's a chivalrous and non-chivalrous way to do different things, right? So I
Mhm.
understand and I appreciate the concern of not doing something in an unchivalrous manner, but there are things you can do even with deception, even in spying, that you can do completely chivalrously.
Sure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of psychological warfare on the battlefield. One thing that I don't think applies to the SCA is the use of crafty interlopers. Sun Tzu defined crafty interlopers such as using 3,000 criminal prisoners that they would throw at the enemy and wait for the confusion. And when the enemy is confused with all these vagrants basically in the middle of the battlefield, then they would take advantage of that confusion and attack. I can't see ourselves using anything like that. And
Actually, we
Yeah, I was
do.
gonna
And
say, actually.
what were you going to say, Karen? Because
No,
I'm
you go first. I'm thinking I was thinking probably similar to you. You go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, you just hire mercenaries. There are entire units in the SCA that'll come fight for you for a case of Dr. Pepper and a pack of Twizzlers. Uh, this is this can
There
be
you go.
accomplished that way.
Sure.
Yeah,
Is that what you were going to say, Kern?
something similar. Yeah. I mean, there are ways to make a the part of the plan that a certain group is doing uh seem glorious, and because we know that that group is not going to maybe follow the plan, and so we give them the opportunity to be glorious.
No, you're talking about that one unit that one time?
Yeah.
Yeah, those guys. Yeah.
It's like, let them listen. We throw them on there, but it kind of goes with the idea of so the one thing that of all the quotes besides know thyself, know thy enemy, right? One of the quotes that stood out to me over the years was making your troops in the right situation feel like their back is against the wall, and if they know that there's no other option, they will fight to the, and I don't remember the exact, they will fight to the death, and there's nothing they can't accomplish. And I don't remember the exact quote. I can try and look it up. But that was something, and I don't know if I've ever said this past Gulf Wars, we kind of had that a little bit. We were a bit outnumbered this past Gulf Wars.
We were,
And
yeah.
I when Trimaris was over on the we switched from the center to the right flank and bearing down on us. I remember after they killed us all, 70 of them went over to continue fighting. All right. And 70 is a lot of fighters. All right. So, but there was something that I said to the troops ahead of time, and it was obvious that what I had said inspired the heck out of them. And it was, we're going to give the best we can. And I think we did. It's hard to fight two guys, everybody fighting two people at once. It makes it hard to fight, but we did it. And
We had heart.
yeah, and I think also inspiring your troops beforehand is super important. There's a book that I purchased. I was in a bookstore in Denton, Texas, where my son goes to school, and this old bookstore on the square in downtown Denton has this military section. And I found this book, and it's called In Words and Deeds, and it's the battle speeches um, given before and during famous battles, all the way from ancient times to World War II and other ones. And I think what we do and say ahead, how we recognize people before a battle, how we recognize them during the battle by calling them out and say, "This is your job," and how we recognize them afterwards is important.
Was that called Words and Deeds?
In Words and Deeds, yeah, it's fun. I
In the
love that
words.
book. Yeah. It forced me to learn Henry Five's, the Shakespearean speeches on there. I think Gunnar has it memorized as well. I've modified a little bit to apply to Trimaris. Instead of St. Crispin's Day, it's St. Martin's Day.
The St. Martin's Day speech. Yep.
Right,
Yep.
St. Martin's Day. So anyway,
So in chapter two, the emphasis is doing battle. And if you continue in battle a long time, your forces will be exhausted and supplies insufficient. And so it kind of makes me think about the importance of planning and being prepared with your equipment and being mindful of the costs of going to go forward, even gas, getting there, or even Penzic. The budget that you have to be able to enjoy a week off camping. There's a lot of logistics there, and being having the equipment and having the wherewithal to be there, it's something that takes some planning ahead of time.
It does. I think you can war practice your army maybe too much if you have a bunch of different war practices around the kingdom trying to get folks to travel. a lot. Sometimes you can go through somebody's gas budget. So you want to be careful with that. Um,
And also, one of the things that we've encouraged in the past, in particular, is not having melee events too close to war. In the event that someone gets injured, sprains their ankle, whatever, at that last war practice, they have time to recover before they get to war.
I think it's also, how Gulf Wars has changed from its inception all the way to, current time. When we were younger, we would drive up for a weekend and we would only fight on Saturday and go home. And I think that even driving up on that Thursday or and just getting a couple battles in to hang out with your friends is, if you can't go for the whole war, we get it, right? I mean, it's still, you're going for the weekend and hanging out with your friends that you enjoy hanging out with, and I think that's worth it. But the war has gotten longer. It's a whole week now. It's Penzic, I think, I'm not sure when it switched to 2 weeks, but it was a while ago. And then Gulf Wars tried to mimic that. I think that the War of the Wings got longer. They said it's more than just a long weekend of Thursday. It's actually a whole week. I've never attended it, but somebody told me that it's like a full week almost now. So the wars are becoming longer, and I'm just going to say this to everyone: you don't have to go for the entire war to make it worthwhile, and we want you there. Come hang out with your friends. So even if it's only for a couple days, you
Well,
know.
there's a financial cost, there's a cost of time, but there could also be a cost in relationships. Sometimes families, I've heard of people having divorces in the SCA just because, it can affect relationships. And so there's a lot of factors to balance. Uh,
I think that's true mundanely, non-Scadians as well. I don't really think of that as a factor. Everybody deals with life. So
Chapter 4 talks about formation, and something that's been touched on, but I don't think we've really explored is the idea of situational awareness on the battlefield, and the ability to perceive the formations of of the army, your force, the formations of your enemy, the in the moment situational awareness around you. It seems like an altered perception.
Uh, It definitely is. One of the key elements to make the difference between a good commander and a really great commander may be genetic, which is the ability to kind of omnifocus and not be too tunneled in your vision when you're in command on the battlefield. Being able to look at the ebb and flow of your lines, to see where their hot spearmen are, and have the ability to address that with your own, what I like to call a firefighter, somebody like Kern, get that hot spearman over there. I need you to go over there and make it, this thing go down or stop happening. Being able to recognize when troops are building up for column charges and have the command elements in place to react to those. Um, you, that's one of the harder things to be able to teach a commander. You can tell them what to do, but being in the moment on the battlefield and being in the reserve enough that you can see it and not be harassed by the enemy during that, so that you can execute those decisions. Uh, it's better to learn that over time, which is part of the reason why I suggested guys that are interested in getting into the command structure do it early, because the best way to learn that is being in the saddle and seeing those movements.
Hey, Guy, thank you very much for all this. I'm going to have to go. Um, Ari, Kern, thank you. You guys have been great.
good talking to you too, man.
Thank you.
All right, y'all have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good night.
I do want to touch on something Ari said at the end there, and I think there's a there's a difference between strategy versus tactics, and most of us, you know, Ari spoke about this when it's like, when we go against the army or our opponents, and let's say on Atlantia is on the other side. Atlantia is really good at doing that hard right flank, and you know, strategy is knowing who to put there. That's the strategy part. I learned strategy from I think my knight Llewellyn was one of the best strategists I've ever met when it comes to, he saw the big picture. Um, One of the best tacticians I've ever seen was Duke Andreas Ice Falcon. Um, he knew, and he's a Marine, he's a military guy. His ability to see the what's going on around him at the time and make the right call uh, was phenomenal. I've never seen anyone do bridge battles as well as he did. He, I had a conversation with him one time about bridge battles, and the whole concept of rock paper scissor that I kind of, I felt like I was bringing it to Trimaris, but I stole it from Andre years ago, and it had an impact on me. And so, I think it's also stems from his being a military leader for his entire professional life, and but that strategy versus infantry versus tactician, and also within the SCA, the KISS, keep it simple, stupid, right? Everybody's, well, at least they used to think that they were all mobile infantry. We're a mobile infantry. We shouldn't just sit and wait. Everybody, no, we're not. And we never have been. It's like trying to get a group of people to move forward with any type of cohesion. It's hard, it's just really hard.
So in chapter 7 is about armed struggle. And the principle that they talk about here is to plunder a locality, divide up your troops, to expand your territory, divide the spoils among your army. And when I think of the spoils in the SCA, is I think of the crown giving praise to deeds that happen on the battlefield, offer giving scrolls and awards and elevations because of great deeds that were witnessed in the battle. And that's kind of how I translate spoils in the SCA. What are your thoughts?
Oh, one of my favorites. Not only, we talked about the crowns and recruiting and developing that renown amongst command councils across the known world. Um, in those command meetings and lending those commands or giving command to certain battles is a boon. But building that reputation over time is really what makes the most resound allies. And
Mhm.
it could be a variety of things. You mentioned the awards. When I was crowned, one of my favorite things to do was to give out one of our non-Indigenous awards, the Lion d'Or, to someone from either the opposing army or an allied army. Uh, my last reign, uh, I had Master Saif produce about 8,000 pewter coins for my reign. And every command meeting we had, I gave 2 coins per troop that they said every allied unit brought, so they could give coins to everyone in their army. Which, by the end of the last meeting, one of the crowns got wind of it and showed up and took all of them for himself for his army for the last
Yeah.
fight. But,
Yeah.
it could be simple things like that promote the longevity of friendship between units.
I use those coins as Roman enlistment signing bonuses at different events prior to war, and our kingdom money, or I call him our kingdom money, or Saif, because he always provides as a service to every crown. I assume he still does. He provides those coins, and I think they're fun.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
does a
yeah,
customized pound of coins for every reign.
yeah. I think about the, recognition, and you know, if you remember Gladiator, the opening scene of Gladiator, you guys have all seen the movie? If you haven't seen it, everybody else is tuning in, see it, it's great. But the opening scene where he's walking down the troops, and he's calling them by name, and I think that's not only is it good for uh, building enthusiasm, but it's good within the battle to know the names of the people in front of you and around you to say, you know, Guillermo, go to the right, because now you know exactly I'm calling your name. I remember one time I was one of the rare times we're fighting against it was Scotch Welsh War, but it was turned out to be um, Cerberus versus Asgard, and whoever was the Welsh, I don't know, or the Scots, whatever. But it was one of my not my first time being captain, but it was a little bit after that, and I remember giving a command, and it was a resurrection battle, but I remember singling out Judah without even realizing and seeing it, because I knew how loud his sword was when he threw shots. And I remember just saying, "Was that a Judah smack?" And I didn't even look, and everybody goes, "Yeah, it was." And it just, those little things, everybody stood a little bit taller,
Hmm.
and those little things in the middle of battle, calling out people by name and saying their name, it makes a difference. Hey, man, Guillermo, you got this. Hey, Jean Paul, get ready. Here they come. You hear your name said, and it's like, oh, I got a job now, right? And you can't do it for everybody, but you try to,
In the
and I
opening,
think
we
people like
talked
it.
about the way. What you just described was a great example of the way. That opening scene of Gladiator, and it showed his relationship with his men. And
Strength and honor,
you
strength
know,
and honor.
that whole scene is a great example of what they talk about the way. There's something really cool in this chapter talking about the use of drums, banners, and flags to be able to signal your army to do different things. Is
Boy,
that
that would be nice.
has that has that has that
Wouldn't that
ever
be
been
nice?
has that ever
It,
been done in the SCA?
it absolutely has.
Yeah,
Years
that's what
ago, our
friends
fort
like.
battle, it was a generally at that point in time just a single life for everybody. You fought it once in attack, once in defense. Um, they were very heavily strategized. And one of the signals that we used for those battles back then is we had a simple banner with
Mhm.
red, yellow, and green flags on them that we would stand up behind this particular oak tree that was invisible from the fort because it was just in the right spot. But
Yeah,
half of the Allied forces could see it. And we would use it just like a stoplight, easy
yeah.
communication, again, common communication. We use something everybody knows. Red
Green means
means
go.
we're standing in position. Yellow means we're
Yeah,
getting ready to go. Green means go. And
yeah,
all the unit commanders knew those signs and what to
yeah.
do at those different commands.
Yeah, Sir Carl was the uh, person who trained me. He was the first person that really, I think he was the commander that took the fort for the first time. And he took me under his wing, and he trained me on how to do it. And then a couple years later, I was in charge of the fort battle. And what Ari just alluded to was the flag system. And it was cool. It doesn't it works for something like that. I'm not sure if it works in all of the battles, because when you're in a field battle, you're following your plan, and there's no static aspect to it. But the fort battle, a siege, 100% it works. And putting the flag in a spot like you described, where both sides of the fort can see it, was necessary. It was great.
Yeah, probably one method that could work potentially on a field battle in SA combat is using a bannerman to make a designated rally point for after first contact. Because again, first contact, everything goes to the hell from there. But the biggest thing we try to teach our sergeants and our command staff is regrouping after the battle. So maybe using, a whistle through a helmet or uh, a banner to show everyone where the common rally point is could be utilized for that.
Cool. I love how your voice is being projected through your cat.
Yeah.
The cat's taken over your screen.
This is Mjolnir. He is as stubborn as the hammer. And when
Perfect.
he's in your lap, you only the worthy can stand up.
It's perfect. So I don't think this one applies. Chapter 12 is all about the use of fire in war. And
Well, we don't use fire, but over the years at Gulf Wars, those that were there back in the day, uh, people have used some different things. Elephants, kitchen
The,
sinks.
I've
You
seen
know, we
the use of fire with siege at one. I think it was at Gulf Wars once, but it was way early on in my SEA career. But they used one of their catapults and took tennis balls and taped flags to them and launched this massive amount of singular tennis balls. So essentially,
oh, that's cool.
it was like a firebomb. You would just blanket an area. But I've only seen that utilized once, and generally something to that magnitude would have to go through proper channels, inspection, siege equipment, and
Sure.
obviously getting the sovereigns on board with it being used because it's such an out of ordinary weapon. But
Yeah.
um,
okay,
The Roman roller.
I've heard the most unusual story about this subject. Not fire, but oil using peeps.
peeps.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
somebody poured peeps
Somebody
all over the side of
got
the
a whole
wall.
thing of yellow
Yeah,
peeps
yeah,
because siege weapons have to be yellow.
yeah.
And they poured the peeps all over the enemy force as if it was boiling oil, and the enemy was pissed because the peeps melted into their armor. And it
I
was
might be pissed
disgusting.
too. I might be pissed too.
I did not want to be the marshals cleaning up that day.
No.
Well, we've covered a lot. Are there any final thoughts, Kern? Anything that you think we haven't explored?
Uh, I mean, I the psychology of the art of war is the part that I struggle with. Um, there are definitely, taking a look at what your troops are capable of, putting people in the right place, having a plan, being aggressive. Those are the things that I have taken out of Sun Tzu that years ago. Um, but
One of
the
the
rest of
things
it.
that I recall that made me think of Agincourt is how to use humility to to goad the arrogance of your enemy. And it made me think of Agincourt and the pride and the arrogance of the French and their ideals of chivalry, and they had their horses and their armor and the numbers. It gave them a great deal of hubris in the battle, and that allowed for the English to take advantage of that hubris and defeat them.
So
Uh,
we recreated the Battle of Agincourt, and this is back in the evolution of the Hundred Years' War of the SCA, and archery had become started was starting to become prevalent, and Trimaris was definitely on board with that since its inception of the changes to the archery. And so Earl Benin was king, and Anjou was not coming up the hill. And so we outnumbered their archers, and whether they were bows or crossbows. And Benin was king, and he said he marched us forward and stopped the army, and he pulled all of the archers out, and it worked. He goaded them. He just started shooting, and sure, it wasn't killing many because they saw it, but you're like, we've all been there. We've all been killed by the stray arrow that we just didn't think was coming, right? And finally we started picking some of them off, and the archers are just out in front. It reminded me of Agincourt and the volley firing and all that stuff. And I remember once they started marching, the archers fell back, and then it was pretty cool, and it's one of my great memories of the SCI. I was a squire, and it was fun.
Ari?
Yeah.
Um, as far as the art of war goes, again, a lot of my application of what I've read of it has been applied when I was either the warlord or as the crown. Um, so the Tactical implementation on the field is less so for this book, in my opinion. Of course, we can apply it in a few instances, but it's really great philosophy for, aspiring commanders and crowns to utilize in longevity. Not that's It's better to do it over long term instead of just trying to implement it right off the cuff once ever. So it's more of a practice in philosophy. So
Mhm.
I appreciate it much for those aspects.
Oh yeah, it's a great read.
Thank you, everybody, for joining
Yeah.
us. We had up to 18 people at one point tonight, which is a wonderful number. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience, decades of experience. I still have a hard time wrapping my brain around that idea. Wishful thinking, I'll never reach that point, unfortunately.
Well, when you're having fun, it makes it easy.
Yeah,
Good
that's the
stuff,
truth. That
guys.
is
Well
it.
done. Well done.
That is the truth.
Before we break it off, is there anybody that had any questions? Feel free to come out of mute if you wanted to throw something out there. Any final thoughts? I think we have a few people that have a lot of experience that have been silent.
Hey guys, this is Wolfgar. I wanted to say thank you for all your guys' insights and everything. I definitely enjoyed the talk. I got a quick question. I don't know if it's in the Art of War, but there's a Japanese or samurai proverb that sort of touches on some similar principles, but it says something along the lines of uh, because they couldn't find a nail, a horse couldn't get a shoe. Because the horse couldn't get a shoe, a rider couldn't ride the horse and deliver a message. Because the message couldn't be delivered, the general didn't get some key piece of information they needed. And because that key piece of information wasn't delivered, the war was lost, or the battle was lost, let's say. And because the battle was lost, the war was lost. So is there anything in the SCA that sort of parallels that, where like if a decision maker, whether it be on the field or at the higher level, like misses one key piece of info, um, is there any sort of parallel to that in the SCA, like some type of analogy that would match that? And thank you guys.
Yeah, for me, I can draw an analogy to not communicating when command meetings are happening at war. Um, Communication obviously is the most important aspect of command and control on the battlefield. And when you're working with units from all over the globe, then yeah, you need to get together. So, um, communicating out that and getting all the commanders in one spot for a meeting can be that nail that is in that proverb.
Communication all the way through, from the beginning of the war to the end. And I would think it would also be knowing your role in the battle. Uh, Everybody kind of has a job to do, and being able to meet that role to the full force to serve your kingdom.
Yeah, I don't think there's only one instance, there's probably others, but there's historically, I don't think there's an army that hasn't surrendered when they've had bullets, but when they run out of food and water, they surrender. The only the one that I know is like the Masada. They did not surrender. But and there's probably other ones too. That's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. But regardless of whether the commanders' meetings are posted, it's probably a good idea if you're offered to do something that you not drink too much the night before and not show up. Sorry, Ari. I hope that I made up for that one time. Anyway,
But I think that kind of goes back to the idea of preparing for the
yeah.
battle, preparing for the battle. Yeah, eating well, not eating too
Mhm.
much,
I mean,
hydrating.
it does kind of remind me of, I guess, one of the deceptions I think I've utilized in the past, where I had gifted one of the enemy units a keg of beer the night before a battle, and that unit, for some reason, didn't show up the next day at all. So,
And we've definitely done that with some of the Osirians, the Trimarian party.
mhm,
We
mhm.
broke some people.
Shieldbreaker,
But you know what? It's all good fun. It's all good fun.
Shieldbreaker is one of our newest fighters here in Southkeep.
Okay.
He's been coming to almost every activity and practice for the past month and a half. And he got dubbed the name Shieldbreaker because he broke a shield with his sword, and so from now on he's Shieldbreaker. You had
All
your hand
right.
up, Mikhail.
Yes, Guillermo, thank you. As Guillermo was saying, I am new here. Uh, what is your one piece of advice for a total newbie going into war for the first time?
Wow, just
Oh,
one piece. That's
yeah.
there's a lot of things you need to know,
Um,
but have a
get in
battle
shape.
buddy.
Have
Having,
a battle buddy. Get in shape. Get strong.
yeah,
Um,
Cardio.
because and also learn how to receive a charge. If you don't have a lot of experience with contact sports, if you have an athletic background with contact sports, you're going to be fine. But you still should have people practice with you to build you up to that because the war when we're at war with big shields and people don't see they raise their shield up in front of them and they just move forward and they smash into you. And I love the violence. I mean, it's no one's intentionally trying to break anybody, but you get knocked around, and um don't put you here's the best piece of advice I would say as I start to speak about if you're not comfortable, get strong, but if you're not comfortable with something, don't put yourself don't put yourself there. And the battle buddy thing, for someone who's experienced enough to know, hey, this is what you can expect in this one. I think that's combine both of those, and you'll be fine, close to it.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I did
Yeah.
go to our war practice. So we
Okay.
did get charged.
All right.
And
How'd you like it?
I've still got the bruise on my arm from where somebody hit
All
me.
right.
But I loved it. It was
All
fun.
right.
And,
It is fun.
we learned how to ground the shield. I was next to Guy when we were doing a drill to practice grounding the shield. Had a lot of fun. I got my first double kill in one of the practices that we were doing. So that was earlier in the meeting. Somebody had talked about what hooked them into SCA, and I think like getting that double kill and the marshal coming up to me afterwards and saying, "Hey, I saw that happen. That was really cool." And I was like, "I'm
Yeah.
so glad somebody saw that." And
Yeah.
it really I'm hooked, man. This is really cool. Thank you guys so much for your time.
But
not a
I look
problem.
forward to meeting you. In the summer, it's a little bit of a slowdown, but September, Labor Day weekend, there's an event where I'm not sure where it is. I have to look. It's in Florida. And maybe don't be a stranger, introduce yourself.
And if I'm while I've got you here, I'm planning on running another War College on January 3rd here in Kingdom. It's going to be a weekender. Um, Basically a half a day, a little bit more than half a day of training, running through different pit scenarios and then practical implication into the evening. I dropped a link in the chat there to the SCA War Manual that I've created for your newer fighters. The basic shield wall gives a very detailed first time at war. These are the things you should be looking for. Um, I highly recommend you reading that before you go into a big war.
Yeah.
That's a happy note to end on.
All
Thank you,
right.
everybody. I really appreciate everybody's participation and support. And I'll see you guys at war.